Welcome, folks, to our podcast, Therapy on a Tangent. I'm Zori with my co host, Natalie. Say hi, Natalie.
Hello, hi everyone.
And this is the podcast where two therapists nerd out about our geeky passions and mental health. So, this is our first episode. So, let's start by introducing ourselves, Natalie. Natalie, take it away.
Yeah, I am a licensed clinical professional counselor in private practice, and I am what I consider to be a geeky therapist, which means I like to talk about video games and anime and movies and all that fun geeky stuff in session with my clients, and then bringing it all back to mental health, because I think that's an important part of our lives. So that's why I like talking with our clients about it. And it's also talks about what's going on for us too and why we like these things so much. So I'm your friendly neighborhood geeky therapist. What about you, Zori? Who are you?
So, I am also a licensed professional counselor. I am also a counselor educator. So, that means that I basically train the next generation of counselors. I am also very interested in like movies, TV shows, video games, animes, similar to Natalie. And yeah, honestly, I have very often I have periods of hyperfixation. And we'll get into that in a little bit about what's my current hyperfixation and also what Natalie has been focusing on. But yeah, I think it's really important to have an interest in what our clients are interested in. And oftentimes, or often how I've used it is to help clients understand what they're going through and also how maybe superheroes that they're interested, how that connects to their superheroes and how they can find some of the same strengths in adversities that their heroes, the people that they look up to, have also faced as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that, hopefully throughout the podcast. But yeah.
And maybe that leads into talking about like our fantasy lives too, because I think sometimes when we talk about like superheroes with our clients and like anime and things like that, it's like I'm sure there's a fantasy life going on in our minds about like what does this all mean to us, how does it relate to us, what do we imagine ourselves
Hmm.
as. And I think that's such an important conversation too, because I think it's like the inner parts of us that we don't share with other people, but it's still like a really big part of our lives and like a part of like who we are as people.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing that comes up for me is just like imagination. And I think that's a really big part in terms of what we do with our clients in general, in terms of like, imagine how would your life look better? And sometimes some of our clients are really stuck in terms of like what they're thinking about, what they're going through, and they can't imagine themselves, but they can imagine someone else, either someone like BTS, like a K-pop group like BTS, and like what they're going through and how success looks like for them despite their adversity, or even something like Spider-Man, or Black Panther. I definitely those are all examples that I've actually used with clients, and through picking out people that they look up to or people that they admire, whether fictional or not, we've been able to pinpoint things about like what are those characteristics that they're so interested in, and how does that connect to whatever they're going through. And it's been really cool because sometimes we'll see that clients have a lot more grace, a lot more like, oh my gosh, yes, it's fine for you to take a break. It's fine for you to have some rest, this parasocial relationship that I have with this person. But for me, I can't do that. And when we are able to kind of, I guess, use these people, these characters, as mirrors for our clients, then they kind of start to realize, like, okay, I can actually have that grace, that empathy for myself as well.
Yeah, and I love what you said about like using the imagination in therapy, because I find these days it's hard for people to just simply like imagine like the most fantastical thing that you could think of. They can't think about in their own lives, but when they look at it in like the lives of like their parasocial relationships or like what they've seen in like movies and with superheroes, it's so much easier for them to imagine that too. And I happen to be like somebody who's very much in touch with my inner child, which is probably why like I love geeking out with people about like their interests, because like that's when my inner child runs free. But also like what I
Hmm.
find sometimes with clients in the therapy, it's like, oh, your inner child is so sad and it's just like crying in this corner. And how do we help like unlock your inner child so that we can help find joy in your life? And that's when we talk about like all the stuff that they're interested in, they're geeking out on, and even like the things that's like hard to talk with other people about, because I find that like when I talk with my clients about anime, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't talk with any other therapist about anime and have the same level of excitement and talking about like my own mental health about it, you know. So I
Hmm.
think like this is such a great way to just talk about mental health. Maybe the point of this podcast too is being able to talk about like different medias and different things that we see mental health in and why it resonates with us so much. Because this is like when I get excited about talking about mental health, when I could talk
Hmm.
about like, oh my gosh, I did like 6 hours of gaming because I just needed to like do a mental break, go back to a simple life, do something that's very straightforward, you know. But that tells me a whole lot about myself instead of me just
Hmm.
like, oh, I have a problem. I shouldn't be gaming for 6 hours a day.
Yeah, and I think that's super important. And that kind of takes us down to possible different roads. But the first thing that comes to mind when you said that, Natalie, is I one of the populations or the groups of people that I like to work with a lot are teenagers. And, you know, when you're working with teenagers, oftentimes you have to work with their parents. And more often than not, they're just like, oh, all they do is watch TV or all they do is play video games. And sure. If that's getting in the way of doing things that they need to do, like schoolwork or being having time with families, that does bring up some concern. But like instead of just stopping on that surface level, asking like, okay, what is this video game doing for them? What is this TV show doing for them? And understanding that. And sometimes you can learn so much about the client just by understanding what they're interested in. So that's just one thing that brought up with what you said. But then I think the next thing that was brought up is just yeah. What are some video games then, Natalie, that you've been into?
So this is funny when I talk with people about it. So I work with actually a lot of adolescent boys. But that's because like my preferred games to play is like first person shooters. And so when clients are
Mm,
telling me like, oh, I play this game called like Valorant or something, and they're hoping that I didn't hear or not ask questions about it because they don't think I know about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, tell me about Valorant. Like, you know, how do you rank and stuff like that? And then they get so
hmm.
excited to talk with me about it. So I actually have a lot of like teenage boys because I like playing first person shooters. Recently I've been playing a lot of cozy gaming. So I think we talked about
Mm,
this briefly before the podcast. Just like you've been playing Stardew Valley, you've been really into that, and that's one of my
yeah.
cozy gamings.
Yeah. So two of my friends recently got me into Stardew Valley. And for those of you who don't know, like I said before, I'm a counselor educator, so that means I'm a professor at a university. It is not glamorous, whatever media has you think about professors. It's not glamorous. It doesn't pay well. So I'm often very stressed and I often wish I can just dissociate and disconnect. So yeah, Stardew Valley is like one of those like really cute games that cozy games that I really got into. And I just it's really funny because I also got into Animal Crossing like a few years ago. And I played that for a little while, but I just never really got into it. I think my brain was just like, this just feels too capitalistic for me. So I never really got back. And then also the neighbors on the island are just so sassy. They're like, oh, I thought you moved, or oh, I thought you died. And I'm just like, can y'all
Like
chill?
this
You
is
know, is
not a
there like a
supportive
chill off
system.
this? This is not supportive. This is not cozy. This is not comfy. I don't. And then like that raccoon, I have to. Why do I have to keep paying this raccoon for the things that I'm doing? Like I'm building you a store. I'm bringing attention to this island. Like everything that I buy from the store should be free at this point. I think also with Stardew Valley, and maybe this is just because I haven't gotten that far in Animal Crossing, but with Stardew Valley, I also like the story elements, like the characters that you get to know, and the relationships that you get to build. So I think that's also probably what I felt like I was missing with Animal Crossing. I think currently I'm in like year 3 or about to start year 4 in the game of Stardew Valley. I'm married to the love of my life, Sebastian,
Oh
living
man,
my high
you've
school
gone
emo
so
dream.
far because I've played Stardew Valley and I'm on and off with Stardew Valley, But for a long time, I didn't even know that you can get to know people and like bring them gifts and build relationships. I went into this game totally blind, and I was like, wait, you can make friends. You can give them gifts and they'll like it. It's like, what is
You can
that?
give them gifts. You can marry them. I have one child with
Oh
Sebastian.
my gosh.
Um, I think I forgot my child's name, but he is lovely. He's a lovely little child. Um, yeah, it's just been really fun. And like again, professor life is not glamorous, and academia life is not glamorous. So it's been like a really nice little like not thinking about things, not thinking about students or gradings or things like that. So it's been really nice. I really like it. There's another video game that's like kind of Stardew Valley. Like people have been saying it's like Stardew Valley meets anime, Sailor Moon type of thing. I think it's like Fields of Mystia or something like
Oh,
that.
I've seen ads
And
for that.
yeah, oh my gosh, it's in early access as of now, as of recording. And I really hope, I mean, it seems to be doing well. So now I just have to like either cross all my fingers and toes that hopefully soon, like in another year or so, they make it for Switch because that's what I have right now. Or cross my fingers and toes that I, you know, have a cute meet cute at like the cafe or on my couch because let's be honest, I never leave my apartment other than for work. Have somehow have a meet cute with a very rich person, and they pay off my student loans, and also they buy me a really cute gaming computer, and then I can play games and
Is that
that's
something we need to
the
talk
goal. That's
about?
the
Is that
goal.
the real reason why you're on Stardew Valley? So that you can get out and meet people and have children?
I mean, yes. It's like because like okay like I'm a little bit of a hopeless romantic, and even though I do like Stardew Valley, like my typical games that I do play are like more story driven, and I think that's why I like Stardew Valley compared to like Animal Crossing, because it just seems like there's more of a story, um in terms of like getting to know the characters, getting to know who they are, that type of thing. So I do think it speaks a little bit to my hopeless romantic single heart.
I think there's also something very nice about the simplicity of life in Stardew Valley. So I think, like, professor life, you're saying it's not so glamorous, and I'm sure lots of people feel that way in their jobs and their lives too. And I think it gets complicated really quickly when it's like, oh, I'm working and that's all I do, and I gotta make money so I could eat food, so I could live somewhere. But then, like, when you're playing like these cozy gaming games like Stardew Valley, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna go do my farm, gather my crops,
Hmm.
talk to the people in town. Like, it's just such a simpler time than like what we live in now. And I think that's the part that's like so soothing for people, because then it's like I don't have to
Hmm.
think about like when is my next bill due? When do I have to, when's the next assignment I gotta give to my students? It's just such a
Hmm.
simpler life, and I think in some ways, like, we all kind of crave that as like a society's gotten super complex.
Yeah, and I think there's also like the element of, in the game of community, like you're building these relationships with people, and who U.S. Surgeon General, I'm forgetting his name, but like a few years ago, like a year or two ago, he came out saying like there's a this loneliness epidemic in our country, and maybe even the world, but like definitely in the US, and like how that is negatively impacting mental health, physical health. And I think that's also why cozy games, especially cozy games like Stardew Valley, are so popular, because not only in the game do you find this community of people where you get to know them, they give you things like when you reach a certain amount of like connection with them, they start giving you things, they start helping you with things, they like welcome you into the community. But also outside of the actual game, there's a community of Stardew Valley people like on Reddit, on Facebook, and it's just been really cool also to like see that as well, and see the like how people are coming together, creating, supporting each other, even just through a video game. um and I think that's just really amazing. Just something else that I've just been thinking a lot about, like with these games, these cozy video games that have a lot of like relationship elements. How is that helping people in terms of their own mental health, in terms of relationships? How is that maybe fulfilling something that they may not be experiencing in their own real life? And also, how is that, I guess, curating through, again, social media, those communities where they can get some of that as well?
Yeah, and that's such a good point because actually I've moved away from like solo gaming in the last couple of years just because like I think community and connection is so important. So even like the
Hmm.
games, one of the big games that I play right now is Destiny 2. And you know, if you know anything about the Destiny franchise, it's had its ups and downs. Um, fan base has like gone up, it's gone down, it's like a wild ride. But I really stick with it because it's actually the first really positive gaming community that I've been in, especially as like a woman who plays first person shooters. I've been in like
Hmm.
chats with other people where they just like try to tear me down for being, you know, a woman, or even if I'm like good at the game that I'm playing, they're still, you know, throwing all these comments that are so unnecessary. But in Destiny, that was the first time where like I could like do such an awesome shot, and the person that I killed could message me and be like, "Oh man, that was a sick shot that you just did right there." You know, and that's so
Hmm.
positive. That was the first time I ever received that from people. And I play, my gamer tag is so girly. You can't dismiss that I'm probably most likely a girl. Even if I don't use voice chat. So to get like comments like
Hmm.
that is so meaningful to me because I'm just like, oh man, I'm actually valued and wanted in this community where like this is a game that I
Hmm.
enjoy and they want me to be here. And that's such a huge thing. Something that you were talking about, Zori, like when you talk with parents and they're talking about how like their kids are playing video games and stuff like that. I always ask like what video games are they playing because
Hmm.
I think it gives us a lot of information about what's going on for people because if it's all like community based games, if it's like cozy gaming where you could be social or like it depends on like a group of people for you to be successful in
Hmm.
the game, like that tells me a lot about how, you know, this person might be getting a lot of their social connection from video gaming
Hmm.
opposed to somebody who's just kind of like solo gaming. And that's a whole different tone for therapy too. When it's like,
Hmm.
okay, maybe somebody is going through something that feels very like lonely and isolating and they're reaching out to a bigger group of people out there in the world to connect opposed to somebody who's just like playing a solo game and like raging in their room alone. Like that's a whole different tone of therapy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, I'm using the term social media very broadly, not just like, Facebook, Twitter. I guess maybe I should say online social spaces. That's probably better. Like these online social spaces, I think have these like stereotypes of like being where like lonely people are just like on there. But like you said, it's a community. And I think one of like the really positive things about like the advancement of technology, especially the advancement of technology in the video game sphere, is the curation of these communities. And like, yeah, there's definitely, unfortunately, sometimes things that go wrong, things that are not great about these communities, like you were saying, in regards to like being a woman in those spaces sometimes. But I definitely think, again, we as a society, we as counselors, when we're talking to our clients about this, need to like step away from like, oh, this person's playing like hours of video games or with other people, but like, that's still concerning. And instead, think about it from like a more strengths-based approach, where it's like, okay, maybe there is something going on, but instead of just like throwing everything out and saying everything is bad, what are the positives are coming from this? Like if this person is having a hard time communicating in their day-to-day life, are they able to communicate well through these like digital spaces now? Is it just a matter of maybe needing a shared interest, a shared topic, and like then how can we make sure that that can be brought out into their other areas of life? Um, One thing that often comes up is just like, oh my gosh, you're so lazy. I'm just like, if you know what video game they're playing, like oftentimes there's a certain amount of dedication, a certain amount of skill that's needed, and that is not lazy. It's just that that is where their interest is, and now we need to think about like how can we best case scenario merge what they need to do with what their interests are, or how can we like encourage uh the child to use some of those same skills in other settings. But yeah, it's I like working with teenagers. And yeah, it can sometimes be difficult with the parents, especially when they have their own ideas around like video games and like what does that mean and stuff like that. But I would like to think that um in the year of 2024 with YouTube, with less players, becoming a little bit more, I guess, mainstream-ish. Um, People are realizing like, okay, it's not necessarily, I don't know, like a fringe thing, I guess, if that makes sense.
Right? That it seems like there's more people who are into gaming these days, and I think especially with COVID, I think that's really what helped gaming become so normalized because it was one of the few ways that we could connect with people. And Animal Crossing was, I think there is some memes online that are saying like Animal Crossing, saved the world during COVID. Gamers saved the world during COVID because we
Hmm.
already had everything set up to be online. If anything were to ever
Hmm.
happen, we had our communities online already. We already had like Discord. We could chat with people. We already had games that we could play with people and do co-ops online. So it was
Hmm.
it was like when COVID hit, I think the gamers thrived, and then
Yeah.
all the other people jumped on board.
No, I remember a friend who's very extroverted. They were like, "Oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? Like, I've been at home all the time," and like, not to like downplay what they're experiencing because like that time, especially beginning of COVID. I mean, honestly, we're still in a pandemic, but like at the very beginning where we didn't have a vaccine, we didn't really know what to do, how to treat ourselves when we did get it. There were a lot of people who were used to being like outside all the time now having to be inside and they didn't know what to do, while people like us were just like, yeah, this is unfortunate because we're in a pandemic and people are dying, but like also the fact that we have to be inside, this is like the best thing for us. I was like living my best life.
Yeah, and it's not to say that like
Uh,
there weren't some bad things that came out of like gamers being inside too much during COVID, but I think it's to help shift that perspective that people had about like what do people think about gamers and think about introverts who just wanted to stay inside all the time. Because I think there was
mhm,
such a negative view prior to the pandemic, like, oh, your hobbies is
mhm,
video games or like watching YouTube or anime or things like that. And then when the pandemic hit, it was just like, oh, okay, maybe there's some strengths that came with doing these things for people.
mhm,
And I think that is such a helpful perspective in the age that we live in now because the reality is that like the internet is here to stay, technology is here to stay. When I talk to parents, they're like, how do I reduce screen time? And I'm just like, I don't think it's possible to reduce screen time. We're moving to a place where like school is starting to be more online where like you need the iPad or you need like the Chromebook in order to do homework assignments and things like that. So it's not going to be about like how do I reduce screen time, but it's about how do we use screens in a way that's responsible and how do we utilize our
mhm.
time in a meaningful way opposed to just like burning hours like scrolling on YouTube or scrolling on like TikTok or something.
Yeah. Like I think there's definitely like a difference between a family coming together, having movie nights, maybe watching a movie, talking about the movie, that type of thing, versus just staring at the screen, not having any conversation, Like I think as long as, there's some sort of like community element, some sort of like connection that's happening even with the screen, I think that's still way more positive than as we were kind of talking about before with like video games, like with solo. Not to say that like playing solo video games are bad, but I think I think, there's like with everything in life, there's always like a balance. And I think it's all about how are you finding ways to connect? How are you finding ways to build a community, even with screens?
Right. And and maybe this is a conversation another time about what solo gaming is and what it means for people. Because I also see like the value in solo gaming for people when they're, a little bit more shy. They're working on like their own like confidence and skills because a lot of these solo games are very much like building up your own skill, your own character in a very independent way. And I think for some people, they want to be able to do that in their real lives, but it's harder to do in real
Hmm.
life. And so we do it in video games because it's easier, it's more controlled. And so, like, again, I think what Zori and I are getting at is that there's a more rounded way of looking at like gaming and looking at all these other ways that we interact with like media, instead of just like the positive and negatives. I think we're really quick to paint something as like this is good, this is bad. But I think the
Hmm.
reality is like there is good and there's bad. We just need to tease out like what is the good and how do we leverage the good.
Yeah, it's all shades of gray, more than 50.
People hate it whenever I say like we have to like live in the gray area because they want it to be black and white because it's so easy when
Hmm.
it's black and white, but it's just too complicated of a world that we live in for things to be simply black and white.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that's part of the thing about like mental health too. There's no black or white as well. I think you can definitely resonate with this, having clients come in saying like, okay, make me feel better, make me feel happy. And, my response is that's not my job as a counselor. My job as a counselor is not to make you feel happy. My job as a counselor is to help you find the tools and techniques that can help you weather whatever storm, whether it's a calm storm, well, I guess it wouldn't be a storm if it's calm, but like, whether it's good or bad. Mental wellness is not being happy. Mental wellness is able to realize whether it's good or bad that you will be able to get through this. You will be able to, I guess, I want to say weather the storm, but I was trying to get away from that metaphor. But yeah, basically that.
I mean, I guess that's what it is. It's like life doesn't get easier, right? I think there's always going to be storms in life. Like you can't control when it rains and when it thunderstorms,
Hmm.
but you know how to prepare for when it rains and thunderstorms. Like clearly, you're not going to be outside when it's thunderstorming. You're not going to be holding up an iron rod because you're going to get struck by lightning.
Hmm.
And I think that's like the same way with like mental wellness. It's like we're not teaching you how to stop the rain so that it never rains again in your life, but it's how do we make sure like you survive the rain and you don't get struck by lightning.
Hmm. Exactly. But yeah, anything else
Um,
like been, something that you've been focusing on or thinking about in terms of like games, media?
well, I mean, we'll probably talk about this in another podcast, but I'm so excited to talk about Inside Out 2. Inside Out was one of my
Mm,
favorite movies, and I used it in therapy all the time. And then Inside Out 2 came out, and it was like, oh my gosh, now all my clients are into it too, and we're talking about it. So, like, that is the movie that I've been geeking out with people about because it's just so relatable on so many different levels. And I think I think what I really enjoyed about the movie is that it takes such a complex idea about mental health and distills it down to something that's very digestible for people. Because I think when I
mm,
try to explain, like, oh, what are core beliefs, everyone's looking at me like, what? Like, I don't understand. But, like, Inside Out talks about it in a way where it's like, oh, this makes sense. Like, there's visuals, there's
mm.
colors, they make it so that's memorable. So, I don't know. That's what I've been really into lately. But we're probably going to talk about it at a later podcast.
Yeah, yeah, we can definitely talk about it. But yeah, Inside Out, both the first and second movie, all the child adolescent girlies, even the general, like the therapists who work with adults as well, have been pulling that out. And I think, like you said, they did a really good job of um, taking very complex topics and making it easy to understand. Like, is it perfect? No, but I do really appreciate. I for the last movie, Inside Out 2, I watched with a friend in theaters. It was my first time being in theaters since the pandemic. So I was like, ah. But no, we stayed for the credits because Marvel has trained us to stay for the credits until the very end. And anyway, what I really liked, and I'm pretty sure that it was probably in the credits for Inside Out 1, is that they had mental health consultants on there. And I think that's so cool. And again, we'll probably talk about this in another episode, but I really love seeing how in different things like movies and video games, there's this one video game that I'm drawing a blank on. It's I think it's with this Viking woman, and she has it's never said because it takes place during like Viking time, but I think it's implied that she has maybe schizophrenia. And with that, they also had mental health professionals help with that video. And I just love how there's like this, I don't know, I guess realization that mental health professionals and mental health is one just part of everyone's day-to-day life, whether whatever it is, and also like realizing like, yeah, we probably shouldn't just fall back on stigmas and stereotypes. We should actually talk to experts about these things if we want to make sure that we're portraying this in a realistic and respectful way. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my tangent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome too because I didn't realize that they use mental health consultants. I don't read the credits enough. But I think that's great because actually I think that's what reduces stigma when we can actually give like a realistic view of what mental illness looks like for people. Because it sounds scary when you see them in the movies, and I'm sure it's meant to seem scary for certain movies, but I think that really does a disservice for people who are out there who are really actually struggling with that. And also I think it paints a very negative picture for people who are struggling with it and maybe still managing it well. Right? Maybe you could
Hmm.
meet somebody who is actually managing schizophrenia very well and you wouldn't even know that that's what they're going
Hmm.
through. Right? But the minute that somebody tells you like, "Oh, I'm schizophrenic," then that completely changes the view. And I think what's nice
Hmm.
about media now trying to be more accurate and using mental health consultants is like it actually reduces the stigma out there in the world that like, okay, this is just things that people go through, and it doesn't have to be so scary and it can be so manageable.
Yeah. And I think also on like the other side of things, it shows people, especially people who are interested in going to mental health, that there's more that you can do than just be in session rooms or even be a professor. I think a lot of times, unfortunately, people think that like, oh, if you're going to the mental health field, you just have to realize that you're not going to make a lot of money. And I mean,
I think we need to squash it somehow.
there.
I've heard that so much throughout my career, and I'm just like, but it's not impossible to make like a living, and why do we have to, I guess, like set this tone that like if you want to be somebody who helps people, you can expect to not make a lot of money.
Yeah, because that's not true. Doctors are definitely making more money than us. So yeah, I just really love seeing more different avenues for mental health professionals to use the skills, to use the trainings that we have. And especially as a professor, it's really cool because then I can point out to our students like, hey, these are things that you can do. And speaking for myself as someone who I really do love working with clients, but I cannot have a high caseload, which is part of the reason why I'm a professor because I don't think I could do the full caseload of clients that it would be required for me to even have a basic decent living. Um, but there's so many different avenues that I think are starting to emerge, and part of that is, I believe, coming from um, video games, movies, TV shows, stuff like that, actually reaching out to mental health professionals, actually wanting to hear from mental health professionals. And, if it's a nice little side hustle that pays the student loan debts, that's also great as
Yeah,
well.
if people want us to help consult out there, especially in like video games and movies, Zori and I are both available to do that. So reach out to us if that's something you're looking for.
Yeah, we will definitely put our contact information in the bottom of the description, wherever you are either listening to or watching this podcast. But yeah, though, you can reach out to us. We also, again, hope that this podcast is just another way for you to learn more about mental health and just realize that it's totally fine to have geeky interests, geeky passions, to nerd out about things. Um,
And there are
do you, boo boo?
therapists, yeah, there are therapists out there that'll geek out with you. And I hope that's what people get out of this too. That like, you could test out the waters, talk to your therapist about something geeky, see how they respond. Because also like we're real people, and we also have interests, and we also think things are cool. And I will talk with you about video games and movies and superheroes. Right? We got to open the door somehow.
Yeah, and I will talk to you about BTS and how we can figure out something. But yeah, uh, your therapist has interest, and just like with anything else, you don't have to stick with the therapist. If the therapist is not a good fit for you, you can find another therapist that would be a good fit for you. And thankfully, Natalie and I are not the only geeky therapists out there. There is a community out there, and it's just especially with technology, it's so much easier to get in contact with them. So it's just all about finding out who is in your state who is licensed to work with you and just going from there.
Yeah. Well, I think we've had a great time talking with each other, Zori. So I think we'll
Yeah.
call it a wrap today, and then we'll pick it up with something else that we're interested in geeking out on next time.
Yeah. So stay on a tangent, folks, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time. Bye.